From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Republican presidential candidates jostle for position a week from the first 2024 debate, but the big question remains, will Donald Trump show up? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board members Monet Ukwe-Barua and Kate Batchelder-Odell. Let's start with Mike Pence. He is out with another plan, his second from his policy platform, explaining what he wants to do as president. So far, he has the policy field, mostly to himself. Last week, he put out a plan for energy independence to drill more oil and gas in the U.S. Let's listen to him on a video explaining what he intends to do.
Remember $2 a gallon gas? I do. And then Joe Biden became president of the United States and launched his war on energy. Since that time, gasoline prices are up 60%. Electricity prices are up 25%. Joe Biden's war on energy is causing real hardship for working families, small businesses, and family farms. But we've got a plan to relieve all of that. We just unveiled the Pence energy plan that'll not only put our country back on a path to energy independence, but by 2040, we will reclaim America's role as the leading producer of energy in the world.
Monet, much of this Pence energy plan strikes me as classic Republican policies that many of these candidates running in 2024 would implement, opening federal lands for drilling leases, changing the National Environmental Policy Act to cut permitting times. But I do give Pence credit for being out there and talking about the issues, trying to tell people what he wants to do as president.
Exactly. I do think that for every single Republican candidate who is not Donald Trump, part of your pitch has to be A, I can beat Joe Biden in a general election, and B, I can actually implement policies as president that are going to improve your life. And a big part of that is going to be rolling out a policy platform before voters that shows them that this person actually has a plan for what they want to do if they're put into the White House. And so it's very helpful that Mike Pence is leading the way in that. I thought his energy plan was really sensible. He wants to allow more permitting on federal lands. That's something that Joe Biden has really put a freeze on as much as he's been able to. There have been very few leases on federal lands for oil drilling and extraction. And he also wants to reform the National Environmental Policy Act, which regulates the degree to which these oil producers are able to receive permits for any kind of pipeline project. And that has been something that has really increased the cost of oil production in this country and has decreased the speed at which we've been able to deploy new projects. And so these are details that are certainly advanced for a presidential campaign, especially early in the primary stage. But when you put it all together and make it clear that these are the kinds of changes that are going to increase American energy production, help us get towards energy independence, and lower the cost of energy, it's something that really is going to be appealing to voters. And I think that we've seen that one of Biden's biggest vulnerabilities is his energy policy and the performance of the economy, particularly inflation, under his watch. And so Pence is certainly going to have to make the case against Donald Trump on the debate stage. He's certainly going to have to show Republican voters that he's a fighter for a lot of the cultural causes that are driving interest in politics among the conservative base these days. But I think that he's very wise in suggesting that policy is still going to be an important part of this primary process. And hopefully, once he puts some of those ideas out into the public on the debate stage, it'll force the other candidates to take positions on them, and we'll actually have a sense of what all of their plans are.
Then today, Mike Pence is out with another policy plank. This one is pitched as expanding and protecting federalism. He is saying that he wants to eliminate the Department of Education. He wants to start selling off the federal government's massive land holdings, and he wants to divest federal welfare programs, saying that help to the needy should be consolidated into simple grants and given to the states. And Kate, again, some of that stuff strikes me as classic Republican policy, though some of the rest of this plan might be something that would irk more populist conservatives.
One area where I think he deserves particular credit is he is willing to talk about the Affordable Care Act and it continuing not to work and premiums going up. He mentioned a doctor shortage. I mean, this has been one issue that Republicans have almost entirely disappeared from and refused to touch since the failure to repeal Obamacare several years ago. So I think he's engaging on some good issues that haven't gone away and where there are openings for Republicans who are willing to make the case. Education is also another area where he's made a pretty bold proposal and wants to basically make school choice universal. And he says he wants to eliminate the Department of Education. That's a simple proposal that probably will never happen, but it nonetheless gets voters' attentions and focuses them on the issue. You need to root this plan in some larger picture and story about America and its need for both economic and international renewal. I do think that this plan would be best presented in that context. We haven't gotten any tax details from Vice President Pence. And I think some Americans will look at this and not really appreciate why they should support some of this or why this should be something that they vote on. So I do think he's started to make that pitch. He wants to capitalize on the Reagan revival legacy of a strong economy and peace through strength. So the question is whether he can fit these proposals in that larger theme.
It is a traditional mode of campaigning here for Mike Pence, releasing these policy documents. And Monet, this is what I've been waiting for, looking on these campaign websites. Some of them still don't even have issue pages. Here's one from Tim Scott. He has a page about Biden's blueprint, and then he has some contrasting points about Tim Scott. Biden promotes fear and chaos. Tim Scott will stand with law enforcement. Biden set off the worst inflation in 40 years. Tim Scott will lower the cost of gas and groceries. I think in a presidential campaign, you really owe the public a more detailed explanation of what you actually want to do. And so, Monet, is it that some of these candidates have a feeling that that's not how to appeal to voters today? Or is it just that they are waiting to do that until we get a little bit later into the cycle and some of the controversies about President Trump and these indictments die down, and so they can put out these policy documents in a place when more people might actually notice them?
I think that latter take is correct. I think that they probably believe that in this early stage of the primary where A, they have to contend with Donald Trump, who clearly is the heavy favorite to win the nomination, and B, they have to distinguish themselves from such a huge crowd of contenders on that debate stage, that they really are focusing on building their personal brand, basically pitching a flavor of politics to voters and showing how their political career up to this point has prepared them for the nomination and potentially for the presidency. So candidates like Tim Scott, who you mentioned has scant policy information on his website so far, really is more focused on telling the inspirational story of his life and his upbringing to voters and hoping that he can build a lot of attention with that. And then maybe at some point down the line, we'll be able to flesh out a more detailed policy approach. I do think even with Ron DeSantis, who obviously is in his second term as governor of Florida and was really renowned for his approach to policy and his successes in Florida, hasn't really put a huge emphasis on policy compared with trying to pitch voters on the style of presidency that he would lead, taking on woke corporations, taking on China, et cetera. He did have an economic policy speech about a couple of weeks ago where he laid out a few agenda items, but even that was very clearly trying to show we want an economic approach that's going to take on China. We want an economic approach that's going to cut the legs out from some of these woke companies that he believes are forcing progressive culture on the American public. So even his economic plan for now was clearly more focused on showing voters what kind of candidate he is and appealing to populist voters than it was on specifics about the policies he would implement to grow the economy. So the optimistic take is that this is something that they're doing just now because it's an early phase, and hopefully we'll get more detail down the line. But I do think, again, that it's good of Mike Pence to start the conversation about specific policies that are focused on economic fundamentals. And hopefully, once he does that, other candidates will be forced to respond and we'll get a more substantive debate.
It does seem, though, that when they get on the debate stage in Milwaukee next week, these candidates are going to be asked some pretty pointed questions about what they want to do if they win the White House. But for now, the biggest question seems to be whether former President Trump will be there at all. The Republican Party has set a rule for participation in this debate. One of the rules is that you have to sign a pledge saying that you will support the eventual Republican nominee, even if it isn't you. And President Trump recently said he will decline to do that. He said, I wouldn't sign the pledge. They want you to sign a pledge, but I can name 3 or 4 people that I wouldn't support for president. So right there, there's a problem. And Kate, what do you make of this? On one hand, I think it's fair that the Republican Party gets to decide the rules for who gets to participate in its primary debates. On the other hand, now they're in a bit of a bind because if they try to enforce the rule and say that Trump is not allowed on the debate stage, maybe that is exactly what Trump wants.
Yeah, Kyle, the last thing I'll say quickly on the policy substance is just if any of our presidential candidates are out there listening, I mean, don't wait to get into some of this substance. I mean, Trump's entire platform is retribution for some things that have happened to him, some of which are legitimate, others which are imagined. But he won't be outcompeted on dark mood. It'll take a compelling substantive alternative. So hopefully these candidates start to really flesh out some more details. Tim Scott's a great example of somebody I'd like to see. What's the Tim Scott tax plan? Start to give voters a real vision of where you want to go, because it's a way to talk about the future and not relitigating 2020 and the election there. On the loyalty pledge brouhaha, I do think that the party has its own imperatives that are bigger than any one candidate. And I can see why a loyalty pledge might make sense for them, though, of course, Trump could always agree to it and then tear it up whenever he sees fit afterward. So I think they should, at this point, now that they have put it out there as a requirement, they need to stick to it and enforce it. I don't think Trump skipping the debate, maybe that is what he wants, but I don't know that that works for him in his current situation and with such a segment of the party so turned off to him. His polls, I get it, they look immovable. He's way ahead of the competition, but that could change, especially if somebody is up there on the stage making a compelling case and voters see something they like. So I don't think it's a good strategy to try to skip the debate on his part, and I'm not sure it'll work.